Welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Petunia Lee. She's a psychologist and now a hypnotherapist and past life regression therapist. So, welcome to the podcast, Petunia.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
So, Petunia, you're there in Singapore right now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you live and work there, and you also give sessions online. And so, I'll give a bit of an introduction about your background and then an idea of some of the things that we're going to focus on today. So Petunia has got a PhD in organizational psychology and business studies. She's used that in the past when she specialized in the science of human motivation in organizations. She ran workshops to teach managers how to motivate and did one-to-one coaching to managers, particularly those whose teams had high turnovers. She then switched in her career in 2010 and used these techniques with children. And she wrote the book, Internal Drive Theory, Motivate Your Children to Want to Study, Motivation Strategies for Your Primary School Kid. And she founded the learning center, the Collaboration Corner. So she'd work there with all kinds of kids, including people with Aspergers who had high IQs but lower EQs, and gifted and special needs children. So we'll talk a bit about the children and their parents as we get into this podcast. But also, Petunia then again switched her journey as she had a spiritual awakening and some personal healing. That led her to discover hypnotherapy and past life regression therapy. And she had her own sessions in which she experienced her own past lives and had various awakening experiences. So we'll find out in a future podcast about the kind of work that she does specifically in the sessions that she gives. But for now, we can focus on a lot of the transferable skills she brings. I'm curious now, Petunia, with all that background and the evolution that you've had, how are things looking for you moving forward? What kind of modalities are you going to specialize in, and what kind of people do you work with now and going forward?
Having completed Mark's hypnotherapy, past life regression, and life between lives regression program, I intend to specialize in healing people with complex PTSD and healing people with who've been victims of long-term narcissistic abuse. I think healers should bring their mess to work. We walk the journey, we've faced, the mess, and we've made sense of it, and we know the way out. So we walk through it, we've come out of it, and now it's time to show the way to others who are currently in pain.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I know when you made that first shift from working with corporates and adults to working with children, that was partly motivated by seeing your own child, isn't it? And so what you're talking about is something that you can really personally identify with, and getting deeply involved with that as a speciality. So I think that's really useful for anyone listening. A hypnotherapist may be tempted to say, I'm a hypnotherapist, I do smoking, weight loss, personal issues, phobias, fears, anxieties, everything. But I think it's really helpful for people to identify what their strongest karmic connection is with, and to not be afraid to specialize to a degree, and to say, I don't work with some of those general issues, and I do work with some of these specifically. What was it about working with children specifically when you made that first shift to working with children instead of adults?
I had a very traumatic childhood. So my mother was narcissistic. But coming into adulthood, one of the most intuitive ways to cope with trauma is to not look at it. So I was interested in psychology. I did a degree in business. It's very far away from anything that's abnormal, anything that is traumatic. No abnormal psychology, no trauma psychology for me. I wanted to do positive psychology, and I put all my effort there. So I did research in motivation, how to bring people to a state of high motivation, how to get people motivated to achieve the impossible. And that was my thesis topic, how to motivate people to achieve impossible goals. I was quite happy as a management consultant when I had problems with my children not being motivated. So I left my day job and I started to help my kids. And then I realized that there was a market niche that I had not realized, and that there was money to be made in the area of helping parents to motivate their children. And so it started there. And I started at first by giving advice for free because, well, the idea of it being a business did not occur to me. But soon I was doing it so much that I thought, hey, I should be paid for it. And I started charging. And then from there, I realized that many families had conflict, parent-child conflict. Parents couldn't seem to get their kids to do what they wanted. Now, if you have what is conventionally known as a neurotypical kid, it's easier. But then I was encountering very stubborn cases of neurodivergent children. And then I realized that I somehow had an intuitive understanding of neurodivergent children. They liked me, I liked them. And it's not just like, it's just this chemistry. Children would cry if I told them that they're too old to attend my classes and they have to leave. They would simply flop on the floor and cry. It was that kind of connection that I had with neurodivergent children. And so I thought, okay, I will specialize in bringing positive energy and love into the families with neurodivergent children, because they are conventionally difficult to handle. And so once I started doing that, I developed a reputation of being very good with difficult children, challenging children. So I started to have extremely challenging children appear in my classes. And then I realized that not all of them were neurodivergent. Some of them were giving problems because their parents were parenting in a way that traumatized them. And I couldn't turn these children away because they were in pain. The family was in pain. So I bent my considerable intelligence to resolving them. And I realized that I was reading a lot into trauma literature. And I did my best using conscious effort to help. And I did help in the sense that I was able to explain to parents using research papers and science-based protocols, what to do instead of what not to do. Like, for example, if we can tell parents, stop yelling at your children, but if we don't provide these parents alternative parenting strategies to do aside from yelling at their children, then there's a vacuum. So I started developing a whole suite of protocols to teach parents, if I don't yell at my kid, what do I do? And so I became a parent coach, and I would help parents. They would call me whenever there was a problem, and then I would say, look, let's look at this situation. Let's see how the research can inform this practical situation and what to do. So I'll give a very good example. One of my protocols is called positive accusation. Now, the literature on positive accusation is called self-concept theory. Now, what we do is we use positive accusations to sculpt or define a child's very malleable self-concept. Now, if you tell a child that he's worthless, that's who he believes he is, and then he becomes worthless. So a very good example is this. There was a group of girls, 25 of them. They were placed in a class and called the humanities program. Now, these girls were picked at the age of 14 to be top of their cohort in every subject, including math, at least top, 2% of their cohort in every subject, including math. And so there's no reason why they wouldn't do well in math. So at age 15, the teacher goes into class and asks the girls, why did all of you collectively score at the bottom of the year in math? And the girls responded, because we're humanities girls. We are good in literature, we're good in geography, we're good in history. We're not good in math. And so teacher goes away and comes back the next morning and shows a chart and says, but all of you independently, before we brought you together in this class, you were scoring at the top of your respective other classes in math. And then, oh, so the girls went, uh-huh. And then problem solved. Because they had a self-limiting belief. They thought that since they were all called the humanities girls, they shouldn't be good in math. And that was what they did. So I taught parents, instead of scolding your children, oh, you're lazy, you didn't do your homework, look for instances when they did do their homework and say, oh, you're such a hardworking kid, you've done your homework. So very often children behave randomly. Sometimes they do their homework, sometimes they don't. So instead of picking situations where you say, oh, you didn't do your homework, you're lazy, you look for situations where, hey, you've done your homework, you're so hardworking. And every time you accuse a child, you're sculpting his self-concept. And one of the things I love, one of the metaphors I love to use with parents was that we are sculptors of stone. And every time we use a positive accusation, we are sculpting the stone or the child in the way he should go. And then I moved, well, because I am a Christian, and I take direction from the Bible quite a bit. There is a verse in Proverbs that says, train the child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. There are two interpretations. The first interpretation is that you should train your child in the way you think he should go, which is then with your own human wisdom, you think your child should be this. But the other interpretation is a lot more humble, which is where you tell yourself, I want to see what pattern God placed in my child. And that is what gifted sculptors do, Anybody from Rodin to Camille Claudel will look at a stone and then discern the shape that is already in the marble and then sculpt it out. So I began to see myself as a sculptor of children, and my process started at the point where I would observe the child and I would try and see the pattern that God put in there. And then I would work with the parents to bring out the pattern. So sometimes I might see a pattern for a world-class fashion designer or a world-class chef or a world-class comedian. It's in there, and it's our job to bring it out. So it's not my job to make of each stone the same the same pattern, which is what is done in most schools. You follow the syllabus, you all come out looking the same. So I would look at each child and discern the pattern of the child. And I felt that I had a heavy responsibility to do that, because a lot of the kids that were coming to me along with their families, they were highly intelligent. Singapore has a gifted education program, and many of my clientele were actually certified, gifted. And I felt that I was working with raw material, that if I were to do justice to it, I couldn't treat it like mass production. It had to be bespoke.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because when you think about, you mentioned children were traumatized by harsh strategies to beat, punish, or shame them into studying harder. But that presumption is they have to study law or medicine. And
Yes.
that's pretty much it. And so it's hard to motivate someone, and you do need to harshly make them fit into that square peg. But if they're in fact round, then that will be painful and difficult. As you see the shape that's inherent in the stone, did that then bring you back to seeing your own shape within you? Because it sounds like even as you started, it's sort of curious, what is it that connects you to be able to do that? And as you mentioned, bringing the mess to work is a big thing. And people might say, I want it to be tidy in this way. But the mess, I want it to be tidy like a lawyer. And they see a comedian and think that's a mess. And so, but if you bring the mess, but who's judging that it's a mess or not? And what are we really connected to? And what should we do? And what we should be motivated to work very hard as a comedian and be successful in that, but not something which is just not us. And so I did actually mention, let's go back and see what brought you into the children. But you said something really interesting, which was, and so you see they've been traumatized by harsh strategies. And you mentioned briefly you have been traumatized yourself. So is there a part of you that as you go through this, you started working for corporates and positive psychology and really ignoring trauma by being motivated to move forward? Was there a part of you that realized this is all well and good, but at some point I do need to face that? And to what extent do you think some of the work that you're doing to help children who are traumatized is partly informed by your own traumatic experiences as a child?
I discovered once I started working with neurodivergent children that I didn't set out to work with neurodivergent children. I somehow just attracted them, and it became clear that I had a special ability to click with them. And so one day a parent said, Dr. Petunia, you must be neurodivergent. And so I got myself tested, and then I was. And at that point in time, I hadn't quite.
Sorry, but Jenny, does neurodivergent, are there other synonyms for that word?
Neurodivergent is an umbrella term for anything that covers ADHD, Aspergers, and autism. So these are what people know as special needs children. So I happen to be Aspergers, which means I'm extremely high in IQ, but I'm unable to pick up social cues, read faces. I'm blind to social norms. I have very low cognitive empathy. So I have all these social problems. Now, as a child, when I was growing up, this condition was not well known. So I was just thought to be extremely difficult, very, very stubborn, offensive, defiant, when all I was doing was just being very logical. And I had.
Sorry. How does that affect you as a psychologist and all the work you've done?
You mean how can a psychologist have a low emotional quotient? Is that right?
Would it make it difficult to practice? Does that inhibit your work, or you've made it work for you, but was it difficult at a while?
No, it was never difficult, and I'll tell you why. Let's say you get taught math by a person who's really gifted in math. Now, that person might find it really hard to understand why you don't understand this. He can't break it down for you because for him it comes so easy. So the high IQ people, the high EQ people, I find, are not able to explain very clearly why certain things have to be done this way.
Yeah.
Why can't I talk back to my teacher? She was wrong. Why do I have to do this? I don't like it. Now, because I am low EQ, right? So now you go to another math teacher who had problems with math, right? And learn the long, hard way. Now that teacher is going to be able to sit down and explain to you and say, oh, you know, you do this, this, this. He can break it down for you. So I became really good at reaching these autistic, Asperger's, ADHD children because I was able to break it down for them. That was how I learned. And so my PhD in psychology did a great deal for me because I actually logify all my emotions. I understand emotion through the long, laborious process of doing it like an equation. I'm able to almost analyze and explain emotional realities as if they were equations. And that's my gift.
Yeah, that's great. And so you're not only helping them understand who they are, but you've understood who you are and faced it as well. So was there an element when you were motivating or working with adults in corporations where, so like, how did you feel about that kind of work? And as you went on, what caused you to make the change? And so you said, you know, you'd literally been ignoring trauma and focusing on positive psychology. What was it that made you switch into working with children to move away from that phase of your career?
It was my son. So my children weren't doing well. My son and my daughter were not happy. And so I left the workforce to help them with motivation. But that really, you know, those days where I worked with motivation is so far back. And it was a time when today I have so much more depth, so much more experience. I am so much more powerful than I was when I just graduated with my PhD and I started helping parents because today I'm layered on my experience in motivation, with experience in neurodivergence, with experience in CPTSD, with experience in narcissism. So I can do more today than I used to be able to do. But the journey from corporate to children was facilitated by my son. The journey from my son to special needs children was facilitated by this traumatized self coming out and looking, hey, I used to be like that. I understand that. Hey, I can bring comfort to this child. I can bring love into this family. I can help this mommy understand her son. And families would come in really fraught. You know, the mother would sit in my office and cry, and they left, you know, smiling. I would have daddies who would complain about having to cough up money for my fees, and 2 years later, you know, this man I don't know ring on my doorbell and says, hello, you know, Dr. Pet, I am so and so's husband. And I'm looking, yeah. And he says, you know, she's been different since she met you. My family is different. You know, everything has changed since that day 2 years ago. So I say that whether I have a PhD or not is irrelevant because my training didn't come from the PhD. Okay, for sure, the PhD gave me an understanding of research, how to conduct it, how to read it, how to understand it, how to think a certain way. But but the PhD motivation is something that I've left behind, in that it's almost like grade one material for me. And then I moved into special needs, neurodivergent, and I moved into trauma. But in every area which I moved to, I was using this method of thinking, a scientific method of thinking about these emotional issues that pained people. I brought my doctoral training to bear, but the content of what I was working with is today vastly different.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful message for people that are listening who may be healers. Some people that listen are considering going onto the healing path. Many have been on the healing path for quite a while. And so it can be very easy. You get a PhD, you get a good job, you sit in the corporation for 40 years, you follow the rules according to what everyone says, you get a nice retirement. But the fact that you know that at that phase, in the first 10 years of my career, that's what I knew, that's what I could do. But you've also been able to really look inside yourself, see when that phase is done, and see I'm now a different person. Things have changed, and I am going to make changes in my career, and really think about what am I uniquely and best placed to work on and work with. And I love the way that's changed as you went from being, a single, unmarried person with no children to a married person with children. Everything in your life it all creates a mess, it all informs us, and you've really been able to tune into it. I love the fact that you're also thinking, what am I really connected with, and therefore finding the best people to work for, to work with. And then it's really interesting as well that, and this is something you'll often see where you have problem children, and parents will come in and say, fix my problem child. And you recognize, well, children are to a large degree a product of their parents and the parenting they've received. And so it's not just such a matter of fix my kid, as actually we need to sit down and do some work to fix the kind of problematic parenting that's happening here as well. And so that, which can be a tricky thing, because you may think you're working with kids, but most people that work with kids realize pretty quickly they're also working with the adult parents. And so how was it that, like, bringing that sense of personal responsibility into the adults, and really looking at root causes? Because as a hypnotherapist, I think, we often deal with adults who have root cause traumatic issues in childhood, but you're with them in real time as the children are having them. But it's also really has so much to do with the parents. And so how was it for you working with kids ostensibly, but then also having to really work with bring in the parents and deal with their part of the equation?
So once I developed a reputation of being very good with difficult children, I began to get two types of families. Type 1 were the classic neurodivergent families, and type 2 were actually traumatized families. Many of these families had generational trauma. And I was excellent in helping those families that had neurodivergence, but I was limited in my ability. I was somehow blocked in being able to help the families with trauma. Now, when you have a parent who's traumatized, that parent has triggers, and triggers don't respond to logic. And when I explain to them, don't yell at your kid, do this instead. When they're triggered, they don't think and they go into yelling. And so consciously, my methods thus far has always been very conscious, very logical. I don't go into psychotherapy with my clients. I don't. I'm not a listening ear. I'm not any of that. I want to bring a solution, and the solution is always very logical. It's very conscious. And so I found that, I'm not helping them as much as I would like to, and I'm kind of blocked in my effectiveness. And I knew it. It was like you would walk the journey with them, and then you would I would hit a wall and I couldn't get past the wall. And hypnotherapy now has opened the way to me helping these parents with trauma who are in turn traumatizing their own children. So hypnotherapy has been really, it's, the wall has melted away. I'm no longer blocked in my journey with walking with these people in their healing journey. There's no more wall. That's what hypnotherapy has done for us, me and my clientele.
Yeah, that's great. You had a quote observing that the adults carried wounds within them which messed up their parenting. They were so wounded that they in turn wounded their own children. And so you can begin to disrupt that cycle and the children can begin to thrive. That's so interesting. There are problematic children, but really there are wounds there. So rather than, making them be organized and motivate them or tell them what to do, it really comes down to a lot of core healing work.
Yes, yes. And I'm very excited about this new phase. 30 years ago, I looked at the domain of psychology and I told myself, I'm not going where, I'm not revisiting my pain. The pain is useless. That pain, the suffering is useless. I'm going to put it behind me. I'm going to bury it deep and I'm going to go towards the positive. I want to know what makes life worth living. I want to know what gives joy. And I started there. And I started, helping people to be motivated. It's all very positive. But God is the ultimate. You can call him God, you can call him the universe. For me, it's the same thing. You can call him the divine consciousness. For me, it's the same thing. This divine consciousness, God, had a different path and he turned me inside out. So when I stopped work to help my son, I was still with positive psychology. But then when I started working with other people's children and then the neurodivergent kids came, I had to face my own neurodivergent. The day I found out my diagnosis, I think I cried for 2 days. Before I started to get myself embedded into groups and people who are also neurodivergent. And from them, I learned that, hey, it's not a tragedy, it's a talent, it's a gift. And I became a advocate for these neurodivergent kids. It's like, there's nothing wrong with us. If there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with me. And you'll never get me to admit there's something wrong with me. So I used to tell this to my students all the time. There's nothing wrong with us. We're just different. We're eagles in a world of penguins. We can't swim, but we can fly.
That's great. And so you mentioned that so we know you've got a scientific background, a PhD. You've mentioned a couple of times already a Christian background and recognizing some of the positive aspects of psychology, but also and then some of the deeper healing required. And then ultimately, when it comes and connecting with your own self, and ultimately there's something that you've written, which is talking about when you're working with these kids they're being told they're wrong. They're being told, you've got to be able to swim like a penguin, and they're wrong in some way. And so therefore, they feel like losers and they feel sort of attacked and wrong. But by saying, I'm one of you, and despite all of these things, I've been able to succeed in my field. And then it also is also a part when it comes to the healing, you're not only accepting them, there's also a part where you mentioned you bring through a compassion, a forgiveness, and a love. And so you mentioned it's a lot of the loving kindness that you bring to them was healing as well. So is that right?
Yes, I think when it came as a slow realization that love was extremely powerful. And one day I just woke up and I realized that all that I do is love. It's people would click onto my website. Oh yes, she's qualified. She has a PhD and she's got all this experience. But I would challenge that. I would say it really doesn't matter whether I have a PhD or not. Or maybe I shouldn't talk down myself, or I shouldn't trash talk myself. But to put things in context, love does it all. That if I can love and accept the child, and I can love and accept the parent, I can make miracles happen. Miracles really happen. We can turn a child from a lion into a lamb. And so it got to a point when I realized that as a Christian, we have this metaphor of the vine and the branches and the fruits. And so I'm connected to God, the vine, and I am its branch, his branch. And as long as I'm connected to the love of God, and the love of God comes through me, the grapes will grow fat and juicy. To give you an idea of the kind of miracles we are able to deliver, we have a case. I'll give you two cases. One case is of a child who was diagnosed as autistic at 4. The therapist told the parents, if you are diligent about therapy, he will be able to survive. His mother asked, what do you mean by survive? He can hold down a job at a fast food restaurant. This child is on his way to Oxford today. A more recent case, it's just so funny how God works. I was shopping for quilting supplies, and I was in not a very good mood, and I was just browsing things, and the owner of the shop came to me and started to explain some things, and I didn't want to interact with anyone at that point. I just wanted to browse on my own. So I turned around, and in a very small, tight voice, I told this lady, I'm so sorry, I'm autistic. I don't do well with being explained to. I'd rather learn on YouTube. And this woman's eyes went wide, and she stared at me. And then she went away, and when she came back, deliberately, she said, my son is autistic, and I have lost all hope. And then she started to cry. And I was, oh, this is not a good day. I'm not feeling good, and now I have to help her. And I told myself, yes, but this is what I do. And if I don't do this, who's going to do this? So I reached out and I explained to her what I do for a living. She came in for parent coaching. And just 2 months ago, she sent me a text message. Her son had just achieved what in Singapore we call the Eagles Award. It's not easy to get the government's Eagles Award. You need to have made huge improvements academically and in extracurricular activities. And so this boy, when I analyzed him, he's a musical genius. He learns musical instruments without being taught. He has a way with sound and music. He composes naturally. And because of his music, and because he was so much happier, his mother understood him better. Thank goodness this wasn't a trauma case, it was the neuro-divergent case. In 1 year, he had moved from loser to the Eagles Award. And that's the kind of miracle we get. But in order to get there, I think God turned me inside out. A lot of my pain as a child my pain as a child came from two places. One, I was neurodivergent. And therefore society, teachers, parents didn't understand me. And two, I had a narcissistic mother. So I was made to eat vomit. I was beaten till blood dripped down my legs. I had that sort of childhood. I mean, you put it together, the autistic child is already wondering, why do I have to do this? And you have a mother who wants control. And so put these two together, I was really very badly abused over a long period of time. And so God first turned me a little out, and I had to face my own neurodivergence. And then he turned me further out. I had to face my own trauma. But with every resolution, every time he turned me inside out, the more he turned me inside out, the more powerful I became as a light for others to light their way. The more powerful I became in being able to grow love in other people, share love with other people, give love to other people. So the PhD is a piece of paper. What makes me a healer is my mess.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm glad you brought it back in that circle, because you have that idea of like trash talking about, downgrading myself for my PhD, whereas I think that's an antidote to a lot of people have received wisdom, take that as the highest wisdom, and in science as well, take the science over a humility. Doctors can be accused of thinking that they're God, and therefore overinflating themselves. So it can be compensating a trash talk of not gaining too much self-identity with PhD in science, but giving some of the connecting to God with a humility, I think is really important and helpful. But it also part of what you're doing there is also just that example in the shop is a kind of a radical honesty. So you mentioned, as an autistic person, I have one filter less. I'm open and forthright. It's a double-edged sword, but I don't hide behind socially acceptable untruths. So you could have just politely said, yes, okay, you can show me this thing, but I don't want to do it, but I will suffer it and tolerate it. And I won't do it. I won't do it gladly, but I will do it. But I love the fact that you're just like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't respond well to that. I know this is the polite, conventional thing to do, but I'm not going to do it. And you created in that person a breakthrough where instead of being, don't talk to the clients in this way, she was able to open up and be very honest about the source of her trauma, and to have an abreaction and to cry, and then to take an action of to find this unique person in the world who will just honestly say, I don't want to do this. And it enabled her to bring her child to you and completely change her life. The fact that you didn't do some socially conventional be polite bullshit and just had your boundaries, said you want what you wanted to say, really opened up and did that radical. So how do you be a psychologist with that burden? I mean, it's a great blessing. And then how do you if a healer has traumas themselves or some sort of mess, how do they possibly heal other people if they're not completely healed or have healing to do themselves? Well, that's not an impediment. It's actually a great blessing, and what makes them good. And it's not, as you say, it's not the piece of paper or the received wisdom or repeating what somebody else said. It's experientially knowing it deep down and being able to act in unconventional ways. Because a lot of academia is a convention that we repeat, but you make it alive by, and in academia is partly people who aren't that smart repeating what they've been told, and it's partly people who are creative thinkers who move academia forward. And so you're very much in the second category. Does that make sense?
Oh, thank you so much. That's a very nice thing to say.
Yeah. Am I right as
Yeah,
well, or I'm not like an academic? Is that too much, or uh,
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I I hope so. I don't know. I feel a bit shy to say I'm in the second category, but what I can say is that the PhD did give me a way of thinking through things. It made me a stickler for data. I would always be looking for data, pooling the data, and then finding patterns in the data. So I wouldn't say that academia is not entirely. I mean, yeah, it was this way of thinking about the world is useful. But
sure,
then there is also another part of me that is very intuitive, that somehow just knows what to do in that space. And there are certain miracles that happen that are beyond me. It's like one morning I knelt down in the classroom and I cried and I said, I'm so scared of this boy. He's one head taller than I am. He's violent. He could hurt me and he's coming this morning. What do I do, God? And God planted in my head puzzles. And I went to the storeroom. I had no idea where the puzzles were. I dug it out. And it turns out that this boy, without me knowing, there's no data, no logic, no nothing. I just didn't know that he loved puzzles. And so my puzzles activity is not just a puzzle. I took 4 puzzles of 200 pieces and I upended them into one box. And so whoever's doing the puzzle has to do 4 at the same time. And the children work in groups. So he was with 4 others. And none of the others liked him because he was violent, he was oppositional, he was inconsiderate, he was just one of the most difficult children I had ever encountered, even for me. And he sat there and he said, he was literally like this. Oh, this one I think is yours. Oh, this one you can put it there. This one's here. Let me pass you this. And he was just doing this. And woo! And all the other kids were like, woo! And for the first time in his life, I think, this boy was getting the acceptance and the admiration from his peers. And so he said, hey, you're really good at this. Oh, I'm so glad you're on my team. Look at the other team. They're not doing very well. Thank you. And he, that was a turning point. He when he came in the next day, the week after, he was sweet, he was loving, he was helpful.
that's
That wasn't me. That wasn't my PhD. That was really entirely God. I just feel like sometimes I'm an instrument. So really it's love, it's God, it's the universe, it's the divine consciousness. I'm only a conduit.
yeah, that's beautiful. A lot of times, that's one of the things I really appreciate about hypnotherapy in particular. It's not about I've studied all of these theories and I'm going to tell you how it is and help you. It's really just how to create a state in which people can access their sub and super conscious and ask them questions so you can elicit their wisdom, elicit their stature within, find out what they're karmically connected to, not tell them what they should be. So I think that's fantastic. And what it does is those kind of students as well are kind of a blessing for you. You turned around fear and worry into something that becomes a blessing as well by calling on higher self or higher power, God. And so that's something that comes through. So I asked you about the scientific thing, and but then bringing in that sense of divinity. And so as part of your journey, you've gone through, and in Singapore particularly, there is a strong Christian community and also Buddhist influences. And so you mentioned, and so we'll get on to, you've had visions, divine guidance, and actually seen an angel, and you've connected deeply to forgiveness, love, and compassion, and been able to bring that into your work. And then by doing hypnotherapy and now past life regression, You mentioned as a Christian, we're not supposed to necessarily believe in reincarnation, or we're not taught it. Yet you've noticed the NDE, near-death experience cases seem incontrovertible, and you went on to explore that. So maybe you can start off like a little bit about how your Christianity has helped and healed you, and how you bring that into your work, and then how your spiritual awakening moved on to past lives. So yeah, so first off, what was your sort of your Christian background, and how did that come into your life as a powerful force?
Uh, I think I've always known the presence of God. My childhood was so difficult that if God weren't there, I'm not sure what would have happened to me. So the first time I really encountered God in spirit, that very obviously was when I was 7. I was just sitting in the chapel of my very Catholic school, staring up at a picture of Jesus. It's like the cross, this cross with Jesus hanging off it, and then I felt God. But as a child, you don't question too much. You just kind of, yeah, all right, he's there. And then life goes on, and I grew up, and I went to a Methodist school, and did Bible knowledge as part of uh, my syllabus. So Bible knowledge was one of the subjects that I took. And then went to church, and did all the normal Christian things. And then just walked the journey, and walk the journey. It becomes a part of your life. You read the Bible, you draw inspiration from it, you pray. It's just that for me, I had like visions, like I would see. I saw God. I saw God uh, in my 20s. He was appeared to me in a vision where I was in a garden, and I saw a huge pair of knees sitting on the step on the porch, and I couldn't see the face, I couldn't see the body, I just saw a pair of knees being. And then I was a little girl, 3-year-old in the garden. So my journey had these visions, and I just took it for granted, and then I grew closer to God. I didn't need visions for that. After a bit, I was praying enough, and reading the Bible enough, that I would kind of get a sense of knowing, and that certain ideas that I knew that I didn't know, or maybe sometimes in the morning I would wake up, and the night before I might be thinking of a very stubborn case that I didn't know how to resolve, and then I would pray about it, and then I would wake up in the morning and the Bible verse would come into my head, and then I would go pick up my Bible and read it, and find the verse, and then I knew what to do, how to fix the case. So it happened often enough, to the point that it became so regular that it's just part of my life. That God is just a part of my life. He's just there, and He'll tell me what to do if I don't know what to do, and most times I don't know what to do. And then one night, 2 nights, I had a very vivid dream, and the dream came with specific names. I woke up, I Googled the names, and I found, hey, these people exist. So, give you an idea of one of the dreams I had. I dreamt that I was a little 14-year-old Roman girl, and I was in a Roman villa. Roman villas actually have a light well. So I walked past the light well into a room on the other side of the light well, and the room had walls like this, and there was a double bed here and here. 3 double beds.
Okay.
Can you see?
This is
There.
perfect. Okay.
So this is the light well.
Yeah.
And then I entered the room in here,
Okay.
and there were walls. So this is the wall. These circular bits are double beds. Okay. So in my dream, I thought to myself and I said, well, this is a very silly dream because, I mean, if you have a double bed, then you kind of expect that you would be having sex on it, right? It's not a single bed. But there are 3 double beds in one room, so it can't be a dormitory. And I said, this is a very silly bedroom because you're not going to get any privacy this way. There are 3 double beds. And then I was going to wake up. And then a voice yelled at me, Senatio, 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 Senat. And this voice came louder and louder and louder. And I said, yes, okay, I get it. I get it. I get it. And then when I woke up, I know a bit of Latin, so I transcribed it into letters, and then I Googled Cenatio. And then it turns out that it's a formal dining room. And then I was like, no, it was a bedroom, it had beds. And so I went about my day. And then a couple of hours later, I had this thought. Oh, yes, it makes sense. Because ancient Romans, in formal settings, they ate lying down.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that came to me instantly. The word senatio, I have no idea what it was, but it checked out. So I started to have dreams like that. And then one day, I saw an angel. But most of the, you think to yourself, right now, I tell myself, well, look, if so many miracles have happened, Petunia, you've gotten a PhD in motivation, and then you've moved into special needs, and you've had miracles happen in special needs, and then you've moved into trauma, and you're making miracles happen in trauma. What makes you think that you can't have past life dreams? Why
Yeah.
be so blinkered in your view? Why should God be trapped in the Bible? Why can't God be infinitely larger than the Bible? And with that realization, and also because many of the clients that were coming to me, they weren't Christians. And so I found it very hard to talk to them about spiritual things because I didn't know their language. So I started to read Buddhism. I started to read the Quran. So I actually have a copy of the Quran here. So I began to read across the major religions. And then I found that now Quran, Catholic, the Catholic Bible, it's basically there's a lot of overlap. So many of the imageries are the same across the Muslim Quran and the Christian Bible, but Buddhism was completely different. So I when I started reading Buddhism, and I got familiar with the metaphors and the imagery, I began to realize that it's just a different spiritual language. So I speak about 5 languages, but let's talk about this is a mouse, right? So in French, it's une souris. In Chinese, is 老鼠. And in English, it's a mouse. but it's still the same mouse. So I began to see that the metaphor of the Holy Spirit in me, the Buddhists would explain it to me as a rider on a horse, and that the rider is your divine self, and if it's in control of your being, it will make wise decisions. But if the horse controls your being, then it's going to run away, it will bolt, it will kick, it would do all sorts of things that are not that it's not wise to do. It would hurt people. And as a Christian, I'm called to walk in the Spirit. I have to walk in the Spirit, and the walking in the Spirit will ensure that I don't sin. I make the right decisions. I spread love, not fear, not hate. These are, but I just see that it's equivalent. There is a divine self, and there is the earthly self. And if I walk in the Spirit, it's just like me and the horse is one entity. The rider and the horse is one entity, and the rider take control. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just the same. It's the same ultimate reality, but just they call it different things.
Yeah, and you weren't limited by so each religion has a particular emphasis, and some go into some areas more deeply than others. Some may have had some areas removed from them throughout the historical process of them evolving. So there are people that say that Christianity used to teach reincarnation, but it was weeded out 500 years after the death of Christ. Whether that's true or not exactly, but there are indications, specifically in Buddhism, that do support past life regression or past life experience as being something that's real. And so it's also not necessarily about received wisdom. And so, a PhD, they tell us this is the wisdom, that's it. It's firm and does not develop. And if you had that kind of thinking, you would have graduated as a 25-year-old, started working in business, and stayed in those business areas for 40 years. You wouldn't have listened to the personal developments and karmic connections that were within you, or it might have been functional for you to focus on that element of you. But to me, it's like you would have lived one life. But in this life alone, you've lived a number of lives by having a number of careers within the same general idea. And so you haven't prevented yourself. And so when you had that past life dream of being in ancient Rome, you could have discounted it and say, this doesn't fit within my Christian self. It doesn't fit within a scientific self. No one told me in PhD school this was right. Therefore, it's wrong. Therefore, I'll block it out. Therefore, I won't listen to it. Therefore, I won't grow and develop. And I'll just stay stuck with where I am now, and I won't evolve. But what you did was you had doubts, but you continued to explore anyway. And so I had exactly the same process where I had spontaneous experiential wisdom that contradicted the wisdom that I'd been taught, or certainly took it another step further. And I did, even while doubting myself and yourself as well, we still went forward. And so what you did was you said, I'm getting spontaneous past life, what appears to be spontaneous past life recall. I can scientifically validate it by seeing that, this is actually how Romans lived. And I didn't know that. So something's going on here. So then you went and explored it by having past life regression sessions with a therapist who's known to this podcast and as Dr. Nicole Lee. She's been on the podcast. She's done the same training. And so she was able to guide you through, instead of a spontaneous experience, a guided one in which you were able to dig in and go deeper and find another past life a little more close to home. So you can tell us a little bit about that journey and what made you decide to take that extra step from a dream to exploring it in a more clinical situation, but then one necessarily that, I'm sure they didn't mention it in your PhD course, but you went ahead and explored it anyway.
Actually, I did discount that dream. It was just so far out. I couldn't accept it. And my Bible says there's no such thing as reincarnation, and I just buried it. But I had another dream. And then I had some challenges happen that then led me to consider hypnotherapy as a method of healing. And then I came to Nicole. And Nicole does past life regression. I still remember at the pre-call talk, I was so scared. I kept saying to Nicole, I asked Nicole, has anyone gone into past life regression and then came out and killed someone or something? I was so scared. I thought I might get possessed, or I would be taken over by an evil spirit or something. Because I mean, if you're a Christian, you must believe in spirits, right? There's Holy Spirit and there are evil spirits. And I was like, this is not godly. This is outside of Christianity, and I'm not protected, and I'm scared. And I asked Nicole, you know what? Will I be safe? And then Nicole said, you can pray for protection. But our process ensures that you'll be protected. And even when I went under, I was still like on tenterhooks, but the experience was life-changing. I didn't know what to expect, maybe, but it was life-changing. So I came out of that experience before I went into hypnotherapy into past life regression with Dr. Nicole Lee. I was deep in complex PTSD. So I was having nightmares. And when I tried all sorts of other therapy first, and I improved to the point where nightmares disappeared, but the night terrors began. I would wake up in the middle of the night, just in a panic, completely drenched with sweat. And I didn't know why. And my gut was so messed up that it was bleeding. So every time I triggered into my PTSD loop, I would then poop blood. So my symptoms were quite severe. And when I went into hypnotherapy with Nicole, the nightmares and the night terrors just stopped, just like that. It was just, and I was like, wow. But Nicole did explain that it's just the start, that I would have to continue my healing journey now that she's actually opened the doors to my subconscious. I have to continue to work at it. And so I did. I went on a spiritual retreat in Okinawa.
Actually, sorry, before we get to that, can we just mention just some of the specifics of it, just particularly because just in terms of the past life you discovered, because there was another part where you had recall, and once again, you discovered this time a specific historical character, and you thought, I don't know if that's right. Is that, I've seen this image. It doesn't sound like the dates are right. This person seems a bit, I'm not sure. But then you were able to find a photograph of her and realize, oh my gosh, that's the person that I saw.
Yes. So in my dream, I was given...
sorry, is this in the past life regression itself, where you found yourself in Singapore?
The same life came back in the regression.
Okay, but the one in Rome, there was one in Rome, and then there was one in Singapore.
There was one in Rome, and there was one in Singapore in the late 1800s, like around 1890. So the 1890 life came back again under regression because there were messages from that life for me.
You got quite a lot of detailed information in that, isn't it? Like the woman, her name, who the father was, his position in society. So did you have like glimpses in the dream, and then did you add in a lot of a lot of extra detail in the regression? Because that's one thing people often think. Now, I had a past life experience in a dream, but they're really catching a relatively small part. And I think it's really useful to know that if you go and have sessions, the amount of extra information you can get can be really significant and really have it make sense. And you also had, other lives as well in China, and so on.
Okay, so this thing about the 1890s life, this is what happened. After the Roman spontaneous dream, I had a dream where I was given two names. And I came out and I Googled the two names. So I was only given two names, and some context. So I
Yeah.
Googled the two names. I found an entire clan with father, mother, brothers, sisters, and me. And I was able to, it checked out. So specifically what happened was I was given the name of one of Singapore's very well-known philanthropists. And I was the younger, his sister-in-law. So the documentation on this family is extremely extensive.
Yeah.
They're a very prominent family. And I dreamt that I was the wife of his younger brother. Now, nobody in Singapore is much aware that this man had a younger brother, because the younger brother died when he was 27 and he left behind a widow who was 17, and that widow was me. And so since I was part of this family, I had some influence, and I started volunteering in a school. And so in my dream, I was actually looking through administrative materials of this school. And I had the name of the school in my dream. So I came out of it. I Googled, I found the school. It still exists. I can still go to the old school building. It's been repurposed into a restaurant. And that was the dream that made me really curious about past life regression. And then I started to read into the history of the Cathars. The Cathars are a Christian sect who believed in reincarnation. They were in direct opposition to the Pope, and there was mass genocide. Rome sent armies to kill every single last one of them, to erase any Christian teaching that had to do with reincarnation. The Bible that we have today has no mention of reincarnation. Then I started reading a lot more into past life regression because of that dream. And then I moved into, then something happened in my life, and I went to Nicole and I saw the same life again. So I went back to this life, but in a different context. In regression, because the message was different, I saw myself volunteering in a temple and being useful in a temple. A Buddhist temple, no less. So I was in that, and I was wearing clothes that I could see what I was wearing, and the style of clothes checked out with the era, the kind of clothes people wore in that era. Then in a later regression, I accessed a life as a bachelor in 1497 and I didn't know that it was a Ming dynasty. So Nicole brought me to the end of that life, and as my soul stood on a mountaintop overlooking a river, and I can actually show you that river. This is the confluence of two rivers. One is the Yangtze, the other one is Jialing, and they are both rivers that originate at different parts but join at a town called Chongqing. Now, in my dream, like you notice that in this picture, there are buildings here, and then over on this side there are buildings too. But that was not what I saw. My soul was standing here looking at all of this. But this part was was green field. It was plain. It was just vegetation. And on this part was an ancient Chinese town. Now, I had no clue. I don't know much about China. I don't know. I'm Singaporean, remember? Singapore's not in China. And I I have very little idea. I don't even know where Chongqing is. So, and I remember that when I was standing at in my regression trance, I was standing at this part here. Here, I'm standing here, looking down at all of this. Whoops. I thought to myself, why am I doing? What am I doing? What does this mean? Why am I standing here looking at this? There's nothing to see. There's this old town on the opposite shore. On my left, there is this promontory with vegetation. What does this mean? But when I came out and I started Googling whatever information I had, and I was just given two pieces. One was I was in Sichuan, and two, I was in 1497. So that was just the two pieces of information I had from my regression. And then I Googled and I found this, and it looked exactly, this is exactly what I saw, minus all the buildings. And so my hair stood on end. I was like, wow. And the past life regressions then gave me a lot of information, gave me a lot of context. I went into the life between lives, and I was able to ask questions. And my CPTSD healed for the larger part. I'd say in 2 sessions of hypnotherapy with Nicole, I was 65% well. And since then, I've been like getting better and better, because once the doorway to the subconscious was open, the communication gets easier. And so I was able to self-hypnotize, and I saw myself as a floating woman with kind of flowing hair, kind of floating in the wind, wearing a white dress, and I was glowing and orange gold color. So I was orange gold, and there were spots in my dress that you could see through it, and then flashes of orange light would just come out, and so it's just like this star of and it's all orange gold. Now at that point, I didn't know what it meant, so I went to Nicole and I said, oh, I saw myself as this floating woman, with long lovely hair and shooting orange gold light everywhere. And then I said, what does it mean, Nicole? The colors have meaning. And then Nicole gave me a chart, and then I found out that souls have colors, and that the yellow souls are teachers, and the orange souls are okay. The orange gold, yellow to orange gold, are teachers. And I just sat on my chair in Okinawa, and I said, oh yeah, that's what I've been doing. I've been teaching people all my life, so I'm a teacher. And then I understood from there that I could. Okay, I was suicidal, so at that point in time, I was seriously considering ending my life. And as I was meditating about it, the message came through that I have had a challenging life, and that I have managed to grow from yellow to orange gold, but that if I'm brave enough, I can continue and grow into a green soul, and green souls are healers. So it was only in Okinawa when I first got this message that I can be more than a teacher, I can be a healer. And to me,
sorry, I'll just clarify for the listeners. You were in Okinawa. You went there on a spiritual retreat for 3 weeks just after your regression sessions with Nicole. So that's one thing. You have these sessions, you have dreams, you explore them more deeply with hypnotic regression, and then you sit with that and continue your spiritual awakening process, and that enable you to continue to connect with your inner wisdom and divine energy. And so now you're talking about being in Okinawa. That's in this life, following your past life sessions, right?
yes,
Okay.
yes. So after my past life regressions with Nicole, many of my physical symptoms and disappeared. No more nightmares, night terrors, no more anxiety attacks. But I still found no meaning in life, and I still wanted to, I at that point I was like, hey, I don't like being on Earth. I want to, go back to where I came from and go back to God. And I'm tired. I'm really tired. And so when then the message came through that it's okay, you can be tired. And if you decide to come home, it's okay because you have done a lot. But if you're brave enough and you continue, you can still make use of this life to grow into a healer. And for me, that was something that I not ever expected, because your classic healer is your doctor. You need to be trained in traditional Chinese medicine. You need to be trained in medicine. And it was just not me. I wasn't trained in that way. I could teach, but I didn't think I could heal. So I sat with that idea, and then when I came back from Okinawa, I got this message. I didn't quite know what to make of it, but I thought, okay, I'm going to sit with it. And so I came back from Okinawa, and Nicole said, let's go for tea. Let's catch up. And I said, oh, okay, let's go. And I was very excited to tell her all my stuff, in Okinawa. And then she waited. She was so patient. She waited like 2 hours before I stopped talking. And then she goes, I've got something to tell you or ask you. And then she said, I need a partner. I can't cope with the workload. And it all just fell into place. So I was told that I can be a healer. And here she is giving me an opportunity to be a healer. And then I said, oh, okay. So how do I become you? And then she says, oh, sign up with Mark. And then I did. And then when I was filling out the intake form, there was one question that said, do you have any clients who want hypnotherapy that you can practice on? And I was looking at it, nah, nobody. I don't think anybody, because I'm a parent coach, nobody comes to me for hypnotherapy, right? So it's not what I expect, it's not what they expect. And so I said no. So I sent off the intake form to you, and then I went to bed. And at 11:30, I received a call from this lady. And this was a case that I felt blocked. I helped her, we did put in effort, and we both would run into the wall. And it didn't occur to me at the time when I filled out the form that she would benefit from hypnotherapy. So she calls me, and I take up my phone and said, it's 11:30. I'm not going to pick up the call. So I tried to swipe to delete the call, swipe it away. But I accidentally picked it up. And then the conversation was, oh, how have you been? And I've been fine. And I told her about my hypnotherapy and my past life regression. And then this lady goes, I want to do hypnotherapy. I want to do past life regression. It might be an answer for my trauma. And then I was like, oh, okay. So I really felt that I'm now that God, the universe, the divine consciousness is that if you're on the current going in the direction that he wants you to go, then you don't even have to do anything. It will all just fall into place.
That's wonderful. That's a great way to bring the story to a conclusion. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Before we go, how can people find you if they've heard you and resonate with your journey and see some of themselves in you? How can they contact you if they want to have past life hypnotherapy or between live sessions with you?
They can Google Dr. Petunia Lee or Dr. Nicole Lee at the Consciousness Center.
Fantastic. Okay, and so look forward. So thank you so much for being on this podcast. I look forward to finding out some of the details of the clients you're working with hypnotherapy and past life regression. But I think it's just really helpful for fellow healers to hear your journey and experiences and what brought you to that. I really look forward to your specific case studies coming up. But your own case study and your own journey has been a wonderful teaching story in itself. So thank you so much for your honesty and wisdom and sharing that with us.
Happy to share. Thank you for inviting me.